There's no time for us. There's no place for us.
In the quiet town of Willow Creek, a place better known for its cornfields than its champions, a boy named Mickey Callisto was already beginning to defy expectations. Born into a working-class family, Mickey's life was grounded in discipline, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief in something greater than himself. While most children chased dreams with fleeting curiosity, Mickey clung to his with the tenacity of someone who knew he was destined for more. From an early age, it was clear this wasn't just another kid playing catch in the backyard. Whether he was sprinting past defenders on a football field or leaping for impossible shots on a makeshift basketball court, Mickey moved with an energy that suggested something deeper than raw talent. It was hunger, not for fame or trophies, but for purpose. His parents, humble and hardworking, recognized the fire in their son. They nurtured it quietly, never boasting, never demanding, just supporting. But behind Mickey's rise was a quiet pressure, one he placed on himself. He wasn't just trying to win games. He was trying to escape the limits of small-town life and prove that greatness could come from anywhere. Even as a boy, Mickey spoke about wanting to change the world, not through politics or power, but through inspiration. He believed his story could be more than a personal triumph. It could be a message. And so, day after day, he trained like his life depended on it. Because in his mind, it did. But for all his talent and ambition, no one could have predicted just how far Mickey Callisto would go, or how far he would fall. Mickey Callisto's breakthrough didn't come with fanfare. It came with sweat, grit, and an undeniable display of talent that even the most seasoned scouts couldn't ignore. At just 17, during a regional sports tournament, Mickey delivered a performance so electrifying that it left professional recruiters speechless. In the span of a single weekend, his life changed. A major league team known for producing legends extended an offer that would catapult the small-town prodigy onto the national stage. Almost overnight, Mickey went from Willow Creek's local hero to one of the most talked-about names in professional sports. His debut season was the stuff of legends. Game after game, he shattered expectations, racking up highlight reels that flooded sports media and captivated fans across the country. But what made Mickey different wasn't just his physical dominance, it was his character. In every interview, he remained humble. In every victory, he credited his team. Despite the rising fame, Mickey never forgot where he came from. Fans saw themselves in him, a grounded, hard-working dreamer who never let success cloud his values. Brands lined up to sponsor him. Commentators called him the next big thing. For a moment, it seemed like nothing could stop him. Mickey Callisto had become the embodiment of the American dream. But even as the headlines praised his meteoric rise, few noticed the quiet fatigue behind his eyes. The boy who had trained with passion now trained with obligation. The stakes were no longer just personal, they were public. And while the world cheered his every move, the pressure to be perfect began its silent crawl into Mickey's soul. As Mickey Callisto's name blazed across headlines and his face dominated billboards, the world only saw the glory. But behind the curtain of applause and endorsement deals, a different reality was unfolding. Fame, once a dream, was beginning to feel like a trap. Every game wasn't just a performance, it was a test. Every mistake, no matter how minor, was dissected by analysts, magnified by critics, and plastered across social media within minutes. The carefree boy from Willow Creek had become a product, marketed, sold, and expected to deliver perfection every single time. The pressure wasn't just on the field. Sponsors expected appearances, interviews, smiles, and marketability. Mickey was no longer just an athlete. He was a brand. And that brand couldn't afford bad days, injuries, or even emotions. Internally, the weight began to mount. What had once been passion now felt like responsibility. What once drove him now dragged him down. And while the cameras captured his triumphs, they missed the sleepless nights, the panic before games, and the creeping sense that he was slowly losing control of the life he had worked so hard to build. Mickey still smiled for the cameras, but those closest to him noticed a change. The forced laughs, the shorter phone calls, the quiet exhaustion in his voice. He was burning out, but no one dared say it. After all, how could someone with everything be unhappy? But fame is a double-edged sword. And for Mickey Callisto, the edge was getting dangerously close. The pressure that had fueled his rise was now threatening to pull everything apart. And the breaking point was closer than anyone realized. It was supposed to be the crowning moment of Mickey Callisto's career. The championship game. The stadium lights blazed, fans roared his name, and millions watched from home as the golden boy of professional sports prepared to cement his place in history. But in a matter of seconds, everything changed. During a high-stakes play, Mickey twisted his body mid-sprint, an instinctive move that had won games before. But this time, something went terribly wrong. A sickening snap echoed across the field, followed by a collective gasp from the crowd. Mickey collapsed. The pain was immediate and excruciating. His face contorted in agony as teammates and medics rushed to his side. The stadium fell silent. What was meant to be a night of triumph turned into a nightmare played out in real time. Initial hopes of a minor sprain were quickly dashed. The diagnosis was brutal. A career-threatening injury that no one saw coming. Torn ligaments. Structural damage. Months, if not years, of rehab ahead. Suddenly, the unstoppable force that was Mickey Callisto had been brought to a screeching halt. The media, once breathless in their praise, shifted tone. Analysts speculated whether he'd ever return. Commentators questioned if he had peaked too early. And behind closed doors, Mickey confronted a terrifying new reality. The game that defined him might be over. The spotlight dimmed, and in its place came doubt, fear, and a creeping sense of loss. Everything he had built, every sacrifice, every moment of glory, was now teetering on the edge of ruin. And as the cheers faded into silence, Mickey was forced to ask himself the question no athlete ever wants to face. Who am I without the game? For someone like Mickey Callisto, whose identity had always been inseparable from his sport, the injury didn't just end his career. It fractured his entire sense of self. Gone were the structured days filled with training, strategy meetings, and the roar of the crowd. In their place came long hours of physical therapy, isolation, and an overwhelming silence he didn't know how to live with. The sudden absence of purpose left Mickey drifting. Friends and family tried to reach him, to remind him that he was more than the jersey, more than the accolades. But Mickey didn't believe it. The very thing that had given his life meaning had vanished in an instant, and in its absence, he was consumed by confusion, grief, and self-doubt. Publicly, he vanished. Privately, he unraveled. The spark in his eyes dimmed. Days blended together. He went through the motions of recovery, but his heart wasn't in it. He wasn't just mourning the loss of a career. He was mourning the death of who he used to be. Invitations from sports networks, podcast hosts, and brand representatives were left unanswered. Mickey couldn't bear to be seen as a former anything. Each well-meaning message of encouragement only deepened his sense of failure. He had let everyone down, the fans, the coaches, and most crushingly, himself. Even the people closest to him began to feel the distance grow. He withdrew, not out of anger, but out of shame. In his mind, he wasn't worth saving anymore. The applause that once validated his existence had stopped, and all that remained was a deafening silence and a mirror he could barely face. Mickey Callisto wasn't injured anymore. He was lost. And what he would do next would define whether he would find his way back or disappear entirely. Mickey Callisto story, Mickey Callisto documentary. Rise and fall of Mickey Callisto, tragic downfall, untold story. Addiction in sports, mental health, sports injury. Redemption story, inspirational, emotional story, athlete breakdown. Celebrity downfall, shocking truth, sports legacy, inspirational documentary. What happened to Mickey Callisto, fallen star, famous athlete tragedy. Real life story, fame and addiction, athlete mental health, motivational story, heartbreaking story. At Mickey Callisto's lowest point, when the weight of failure, addiction, and isolation nearly crushed him, something shifted. It wasn't a miracle or a grand intervention. It was a moment of quiet reckoning. Looking around at the ruin his life had become, Mickey made a decision that surprised even himself. He checked into rehab. With trembling hands and a mind clouded by shame, he took his first real step toward healing. The road was anything but smooth. Withdrawal was brutal. Therapy unearthed painful memories he had long buried. Each day in recovery felt like a marathon with no finish line. But for the first time in years, Mickey began to feel again. Not just pain, but possibility. Slowly, the fog started to lift. And with it came a realization. His story wasn't over. Redemption wouldn't come from returning to the spotlight, but from helping others avoid the same fall. Mickey began speaking to young athletes, opening up about his injury, his addiction, and the crushing mental toll of fame. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He told them the truth, that strength isn't measured by how many records you break, but by how willing you are to face your darkest days. His honesty resonated. Schools, sports programs, even rehab centers started inviting him to share his journey. And in giving his pain a purpose, Mickey found a new identity. Not as an athlete, but as a mentor. For the first time since his injury, he felt purpose return. He began rebuilding his life, one conversation at a time. And though the scars of his past remained, they no longer defined him. They empowered him. It seemed at last that Mickey Callisto was not only healing, he was becoming whole. But as life began to stabilize, fate was not done with him, yet sports collapsed behind the fame. Just as Mickey Callisto began to climb out of the darkness and rebuild a life rooted in purpose, a cruel twist of fate knocked him back down. Without warning, a beloved family member, someone who had been his anchor throughout the storm, passed away suddenly. This wasn't just loss. This was devastation. The person who had sat by his hospital bed after his injury, who had called him every day through rehab, who had reminded him that he was still worth fighting for, was gone. And with their passing, the fragile foundation Mickey had been rebuilding began to crumble. The grief hit harder than any injury, more violently than any criticism, and deeper than any addiction. The emotional progress he had made unraveled. He withdrew again, retreating into himself, convinced that no matter how hard he tried, life would always find a way to hurt him. The speeches stopped. The messages went unanswered. Friends grew silent, unsure of how to help someone who had already survived so much. Mickey disappeared from the public eye completely. The once vibrant star who had shown signs of redemption was now a ghost of that hope. Fans wondered where he had gone. Those closest to him feared the worst. And Mickey, in the privacy of his pain, began to believe that maybe he was cursed to suffer, that maybe some wounds never really heal. The strength he had found in helping others flickered, as if the universe had punished him for daring to try again. And so, the man who had inspired thousands now stood alone once more, staring down a familiar abyss, with one haunting question echoing in his mind. How do you fight to stay alive when the people who kept you grounded are no longer there? In the aftermath of his devastating loss, Mickey Callisto found himself locked in a battle no stadium had ever witnessed. A battle not against an opponent, but against his own mind. Grief merged with old wounds, reigniting the addiction he had once worked so hard to escape. Therapy sessions turned into missed appointments. Support groups became distant memories. The light that had briefly returned to Mickey's eyes faded once again. But this time, it was different. This time, the fall was slower, quieter, deadlier. Friends, already worn down by years of trying to reach him, could only watch in helpless sorrow as Mickey slipped further away. He wasn't angry. He wasn't lashing out. He was simply fading. Inside, he was exhausted, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. The man who had once fought with fire and fury now drifted through his days like a ghost in his own life. Despite every attempt, new counselors, emergency interventions, the pleas of former teammates and loved ones, the grip of despair refused to let go. The pain, both past and present, was simply too much. And then the news came. Mickey Callisto, once a national hero, once the symbol of everything bright and possible, had passed away. The cause, though whispered quietly, was no secret. The battle he had been fighting for years had finally claimed him. Fans were stunned. The headlines mourned a life cut short. Tributes poured in from around the world, each trying to make sense of a tragedy that felt both sudden and inevitable. But those who truly knew him weren't shocked. They were heartbroken, because they had seen the signs, the silent cries, the quiet disappearances, the long pauses in his once passionate voice. Mickey's death wasn't just the loss of an athlete. It was the final chapter in a story that had never been about winning or losing. It had always been about survival. And in the end, the cost of that survival had become too high. The world had lost a legend. But more than that, it had lost a human being who had been screaming in silence for far too long.